Hi, Amy. Hi, David. Hi, Zachary.
Hello. I'm gonna fix my headphones real quick and then hop back in.
Hi, Jamie. We got Brian's coming in. Got a group today. Let's see, 6 other folks on the call. Um, we'll get started here shortly. Thank you all for attending. My name is Rachel Leidy. I'm the Director of Compliance Education here at FutureFeed, and I conduct the user training. So this is FutureFeed training session number 1 for end users. So we have broken up our training into 2 sessions. There's a lot to learn about the tool, and so today we're going to get through about halfway through the tool. Let me get logged in and then I will share my screen. This is open training session, so anybody who's a FutureFeed user can join. So just for your guys' situational awareness, we have multiple organizations on today's call. You can, just feel free to interrupt me and ask any questions you have along the way. Right? This training is meant to help you guys with understanding how to use the tool to the best of its ability. So feel free to interrupt me. That is okay with me. If you're more comfortable, typing up your questions in the chat, you can do that as well. I'll monitor the chat. All right, so let me share my screen. That over there. All right. So you should see FutureFeed. Yes?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Does anybody, I'm assuming maybe you're all kind of new to FutureFeed. Has anybody been using it for some time, or are we all pretty much just getting started with it?
I'm
been using it
completely
for a
new.
while.
Sorry.
Yeah, completely new as well.
I've been in there for a little while.
Okay. All right. Well, today we're going to cover the dashboard area of FutureFeed. Here, let me zoom in a little bit. That's probably a bit better. So we're going to cover the dashboard area of FutureFeed. I'm going to talk about onboarding or starting with FutureFeed in the different fields you have to fill out. We're going to talk about people, tools, and documents, and then I'm going to stop there. After today's session, you should have some guidance on how to start populating FutureFeed, what security documents to put into FutureFeed, what kind of technology to log into FutureFeed. So that's a good amount of work that will need to be done. In the second session of end user training, we begin at the assess area. We talk about, I kind of highlight how to do an assessment, internal assessment, and then how to document that assessment in FutureFeed, how to create poems. Then I go on to talk about your system security plan and reviewing it and getting it approved, managing your system poem, creating poem projects, and then I touch on the different deliverables that can be created. So after today's session, I ask that you just take what you learned today and try to apply it within your own environment. And then whenever you feel like you're ready for that second session, go ahead and sign up the same way you registered for today's course. All right. A couple things that I want to show you guys before I get started in the tool. So we do have a help center. If you click on the user icon in the top right corner, you go to help center. It's going to bring you to our help center website. You will have to sign in to get access to all of the FutureFeed articles and how to use your guides, all that stuff. So you'll have to sign in. If you've never signed in before, it will walk you through setting up an account. And, it's free account. You're not paying for anything. So just create yourself an account and then you can search in here for, if you ever get stuck with the tool, there's some good articles in here. We are working on revamping the articles here, especially now that we've released a new user interface. Some of the instructional articles in here may be a bit dated. Thankfully, though, the fields and the data that's getting captured and the sections of FutureFeed were not retitled or renamed, and so they still should be semi-helpful. Okay. I did put together a few months ago, it's called a quick start guide. So if you just search for the word quick, you'll get to it. Getting started with FutureFeed, your step-by-step quick start guide. I talk a little bit at a high level, what you need to do, and then I break it down to the different sections and adding people, creating roles and teams. I give some tips and recommendations, adding your tools into FutureFeed. I talk about what should be logged into FutureFeed, the different technology, and how to add and fill out the detail within the inventory cards. Okay, so I just wanted to point out that I did put this together a few months ago. It was created with the old interface, but again, all of the titles, all the sections are named, they have the same name, same title. So at the end of it, you'll find a little checklist if you want to use, copy and paste this and use it for your own tracking of completing and populating FutureFeed. So that's the help center up there in the right, top right of your screen. All right, so let's get started. When you first get access to your FutureFeed environment, you're going to have to spend some time setting up the environment and populating it with your company information. And to do that, we're going to start with this start area. So the way the user interface was designed, it's intentional that the start was over here because after you fill out all of the different fields in the start area, then you'd move on to the people area and get people access, set up roles and teams. Then you'd move on to listing out your technology, your documents. So you're working left to right. That's how it was designed. Now you can jump around if you'd like. I do understand that some of you may already have some sort of NIST 171 results. Maybe you have a system security plan already developed in a Word document and you already have a system poem. So you can jump straight to those other areas and start documenting the status of your controls and developing poems. But the recommended approach would be as I'm, what I talk about today in this training session. So under start, you're going to start filling out all this information. I'll just quickly breeze through some of these sections and then I'll stop and highlight any tips and tricks or elaborate on any other functions that may not be as intuitive. One thing I want to point out here is we do have these getting started guides now. They're present in every section of FutureFeed. And the information in them is specific to that page you're working in, okay? So if you ever have questions about maybe a field in the page or how to fill it out, just reference that getting started guide, and it does talk a little bit about, why we're collecting this information, how to fill it out. It gives some tips and tricks, all that good stuff. So company information, this would be, of course, your company's information. Upload the logo here, which will be populated in your system security plan, contact information, addresses. Down here, this is your risk appetite. So you would want to meet with your compliance management team and identify what your risk appetite is for your company. What this why we included this capability in FutureFeed is when you get to working within your system POAM and you start working on implementing security control requirements or remediating vulnerabilities, um, remediating system flaws, then typically you prioritize the remediation efforts based on, risk tolerance level and cost, impact, level of effort, right? So once you fill out this information here, it's gonna come into play within your system POAM and you're remediating your system flaws. So, sorry, getting a call. All throughout FutureFeed, we do have little green info dots you can hover over and get some more information, okay? But you would want to set your company's risk tolerance level, referred to as risk appetite in FutureFeed. All right, company description, nothing too crazy here that I need to cover, more about the company, size of the company, IT budget, cybersecurity budget. Do you guys have cybersecurity insurance? If you do, what does it cover? When does it expire? All that good information that should be tracked. Locations. This is an important area because this is where you're going to start defining your assessment scope. In FutureFeed, how do I want to say this? In FutureFeed, when you start defining your assessment scope, there's kind of two ways I've seen users of FutureFeed use the tool. Some folks like to only identify what they know is within their assessment scope or within their compliance boundary. Other folks, they like to list out all technology, all locations, all assets in FutureFeed, and then further define of those entries, which ones are out of scope and which ones are in scope of the requirements. I prefer the latter, and I would recommend doing the latter. Whereas you would create a location entry for all locations owned, managed, utilized, and operated by your company, even if you know that they are out of scope of the requirements, maybe you're not storing, processing, or transmitting CUI or creating CUI work at that location. And the reason is because after you enter a location, okay, what happens then is it creates one of these inventory cards. So then you would want to open up that inventory card and fill out the data here. Got someone waiting in the room. Hi, Charles. Welcome. Hi, Charles. Welcome. It's okay that you joined a little bit late. This session is being recorded, so after I end the call today, you will get a link to the recording, which you could rewatch the beginning of the session. All right, so you'd click on the data location that you just entered and then fill out the data that is being captured. And let's say that this location headquarters was out of scope. I would still log it as a location in FutureFeed, but in this description area, I would describe, this location is out of scope. And why are you saying it's out of scope? Kind of same thing with your IT, your technology. Let me jump there quick, okay? Some people only log in FutureFeed the different IT assets, software, servers, databases, vulnerability scanners that they're using that they know are going to need to meet the requirements. Whereas I would recommend logging everything that your company owns, manages, utilizes, and has. And then after you log it, you open up the inventory card, go over to the compliance section and categorize it. Okay, so if it's out of scope, you just mark it out of scope. And then I would probably go back to the overview section again in here in this description. If you say something's out of scope, providing some sort of rationale as, why did you say was out of scope? Another step further then is under the evidence area, you could upload evidence supporting that decision of why you said something was out of scope. Okay, if we're talking technology here, then that technology needs to be physically and or logically separated from what is in scope. So you might want to upload some VLAN, whatever it's called, like output, like the VLANs, the access control list, the rule sets that are showing something is logically separated, okay? So all I'm getting at is in FutureFeed, you can make an executive decision to only log the technology and only log the locations that you know are going to need to meet the requirements. The reason why I recommend you add everything and then further define things that are out of scope and in scope within the different fields is because when you move into that assessment, like if you're aiming for a CMMC level 2 certification assessment, and when you engage that C3PAO, one of the very first things they're going to do is meet with your company and agree upon the assessment scope. And part of that discussion is they need to understand what is in scope of the requirements and what is out of scope of the requirements and why did you say certain things were out of scope. Okay. And so having that information documented and the evidence documented and the rationale documented in FutureFeed, when you go into that assessment a year and a half, 2 years later, it's going to be able to refresh your memory of, oh yeah, that's why we said that location or that technology was out of scope. And here's some evidence, and it's just going to help you with that, having that discussion. Okay, any questions with that? I kind of ranted a little bit. Okay, so you would add locations, and you are starting to define your assessment scope here, right? There are locations. You could also add cloud locations and if you'd like at this point in time. All right. And then after you enter the location, just open it up and fill out the data that you see. I'll talk about these sections here when I get to the technology area, but what I say there is applicable here. All right, maintenance and ownership. So here you're defining at a high level, the hardware and software within your, that your company is utilizing and who is maintaining it, who owns it. Simple yes or no, and then providing that description. If you want to get an idea of how to write that up, you can go to the getting started guides, go to the compliance implications where I've provided an example on how to answer these questions and an example write-up of, how I would write it up. Okay. After company info, start describing your scope. This is your system details. This information is being utilized to populate the top, the top portion of your system security plan when you talk about the system itself and provide the system details. So here, you're going to need to give your system some sort of unique name, a unique identifier, define if it is an enterprise-wide implementation, meaning does your company's entire network need to meet NIST SP 800-171? Is the whole network your compliance boundary or your assessment scope? Did you create a little enclave within that network? Maybe you created a separate VLAN or segmented your environment somehow and are only applying the requirements in that location. Maybe you have multiple organizational units in your company and only one or a couple need to meet the requirements. So you would identify the scope type or system type. Set your potential impact. Again, refer to the getting started guides for some guidance here, but you will want to leave the if you're aiming for 800-171, because of DFAR 7012 or CMMC, then it would be a moderate confidentiality rating, and you could move it up to high, but you don't want to set it to low. It's a mod here for the confidentiality rating. How many users in your environment? How many admins? Start describing the system boundary and the purpose of the system. What is it supporting? What is it doing within your company? Here, contracts. Unfortunately, a lot of this information is empty. We just created this sample company that we're working in. So, you're gonna enter your cage code or cage codes. Just make up a number here. Wow. Simple as that. Add another one. So your environment, your system security plan does need to be associated with a cage code, or you can have it associated to multiple cage codes. What you're saying here is that work you're doing for the defense industrial base is going to be performed within this system, and that cage code is linking your system to your contracts, okay? So here you'd enter your cage codes and then you'd enter your contracts. This is very valuable and powerful area. So if you're kind of in the beginning of, you're just getting started with NIST 171 and CMMC, and you've not really even identified your assessment scope or your compliance boundary, you're going to have to do some scoping. You're going to have to identify where the requirements need to be applied in your environment. And to do that, it always starts with the contracts. Who's sharing this data? Who's sharing CUI or FCI data with you? And then identifying where that information is being introduced is the starting point. After that, then you would essentially follow that information wherever it's passed or saved within your company, and then identify the different technology that's being used, who's touching that data, where is it being stored, is it being printed? So it all starts with the contract. So you'd list out the contracts that you currently have, your company currently has. You'll have to work with your contract manager, description, title, and then it's nice to also identify the specific clauses that you see in those contracts, which are the clauses that are requiring NIST 171, CMMC, and some other FCI protections, okay? Once you fill out this contract information, a recommendation here is in your system security plan, there's a security control that requires you to define your CUI flow, and that's the AC313 control. So you could always, in that write-up, reference this section of FutureFeed stating, this is how CUI or FCI is being introduced into your environment, is with these contracts listed in this section of FutureFeed. So a little tip there, I guess, recommendation. All right, after you identify the contracts and the different data types that are being introduced into your environment and the security requirements, then you'll move on to identifying the specific data types. So are you working with FCI? Is this an FCI only environment? You simply select the tools that you have that are storing, processing, or transmitting FCI. Okay, now right now you see I got a list of tools here to select from to say, yes, these ones up here are storing, transmitting, or processing FCI. Yours is going to be blank. You do have to go to the tools section and create entries for all of your IT products, software, hardware. And then once you populate this section of FutureFeed is when you can go back and then check which assets are storing, processing, or transmitting FCI. Okay. So the data inventory, we have a place for you to define where FCI is being stored, processed, and transmitted, and then as well as CUI. So here it's a little bit different. Here we do list all of the NARA CUI categories. They're all hyperlinks, okay? So you could click on a category, it's going to bring you to the NARA website, which you'll probably want to reference later when you start working on how to identify, how to mark your CUI. Okay, but here you're just checking, yes, that you are storing, processing, or transmitting that type of CUI with a check mark. Okay. Now, to further associate a category with a tool, I'll show you how that's done. So right now it just shows a check mark. If I go into tools, okay, let me find like a database or something that makes sense. Here's a Linux database entry. If I go in here under compliance and I say that this is a CUI asset, I can further identify the type of CUI that asset is storing, processing, or transmitting. To do that, you would go down here and click on the CUI icon, which now it opens up that listings that I showed earlier, and you would click on CTI or whatever category is being processed by that system. Now that I've done that, if I go back to my data inventory CUI and I scroll down, now I have a wrench under CTI. It's no longer just a check mark. So now I'm painting the picture that I have a Linux database in my environment that is storing, processing, or transmitting CTI CUI. Okay. So you can choose to just check it and leave it at that. But if you want to further paint that, that picture, that maybe that CUI data flow in your environment, you can associate specific tools with CUI, just like we did for FCI. When we were associating specific tools with the FCI, you can do that for CUI. It's just a little bit different way to do that. Okay. Sensitive data, we do have a section in FutureFeed where you can identify, some companies, they like to also track that within their environment. They have maybe employee PII or employee social security numbers, or maybe they have HIPAA data because they have some sort of health contract. Okay, so we do have an area for you guys to track data types other than FCI and CUI if you'd like, and if you have other requirements to do so. Okay. Settings here, a couple different settings. First, you can integrate FutureFeed with your ticket system. So you would just put that support at whatever email. Oops, cannot type today. There. Okay. When you have this enabled, where it shows up is under the system poem area. So I'm going to jump there real quick. But over to the left, gotta zoom out. I'm sorry, the right side of the screen, there's an envelope. So now I can click on this and I could send an email to my ticketing system about this specific poem entry. I could type up some additional notes, and get that sent off and hit send. If you don't have that enabled here, then you can't even click on it. Okay. So going back. All right, a tip here is that you can put anybody's email in here. So I have seen it where some smaller companies, they don't have like a ticketing system that they're using. So they've created an email distro, a shared inbox, and called it like compliance management team at futurefeed.co. And because they have some folks internal to their company on the compliance management team that want to stay up to date on POAM items and POAM projects. So they've created a shared inbox and then just granted people access to that inbox. So you can put any email in here if you'd like. All right, POAM goals. Here you're setting the default due date. Every POAM that you make in FutureFeed, it's going to be automatically populated with a due date. And it's whatever you set here. So when I create a POAM entry, if I created one today, how many quarters out do I want the due date to be? That's what you're setting. Organizational scale, impact, effort, and cost. Okay, this also comes into play. What is going on? Get off my screen. This also comes into play when you're working within your system POAM and your prioritize. Oh my goodness, I'm not even gonna try to say it. You're prioritizing, there we go. You're prioritizing your remediation efforts, okay? You know, typically you're factoring in impact, effort, and cost as well as that risk tolerance that we went over a little bit ago. So here is where you're defining your organizational scale. What does it mean to your company? And you define it for the purpose so that way everybody working in your system POAM is all speaking the same language. Okay. It's kind of like when you go to the doctor and they're like, and you tell them you're in pain and they have that pain scale on the wall and they're like, okay, tell me which smiley face or which, emoji you're at. It's standardizing the language. So what does impact mean for your company? What's level of effort mean and what's cost? And then when you create POAMs, you can set the impact, effort, and cost as it relates to that system flaw or that non-compliance. One second here, I got a question in the chat. Yes, they come into play, yep, when creating POAMs. So I can jump there. So I'll go to the system POAM and you'll see that we do have the impact, effort, and cost area. Some of them don't get set. So if it's not set, you have to open up that POAM item and set that impact, effort, and cost here. Also, when you're working in like a security control, if you mark, we'll get to this in the next session, but I might as well show you it now real quick. In FutureFeed, if you mark something not met, it's going to create that first POAM entry for you. So right now, I'll do this objective F. It just has a plus sign by the POAM. So if I mark this thing not met, it's going to create that first POAM for me. See it? And it says no, 1. So you'd click on the POAM, you'd modify the POAM description, why did you fail? What needs to be done? Where was the issue? You'd type that all up and set impact, effort, and cost in a due date. See how the due date's already set because I set that default due date. Okay, so that's where it comes into play, is really when you're creating POAMs and then when you start working in your POAM, your system POAM, and managing POAMs and getting things remediated, you're going to prioritize based on risk tolerance, impact, effort, and cost. Where were we? Here. Okay. So last thing is framework. You can disable that FedRAMP warning that pops up. At this point in time, FutureFeed, the software as a service is not FedRAMP moderate equivalent. Where we are hosted, the software is hosted in AWS Gov. And the cloud platform that's hosting our software is FedRAMP moderate authorized. They may even be FedRAMP high authorized. I forget. They're either moderate or high authorized. The software, however, is not yet. We are working on implementing 853 and aiming for an assessment a few months from now so that way we can hopefully obtain FedRAMP moderate equivalency. So for now, if you're a system administrator and your organization doesn't have a FedRAMP requirement for a system like FutureFeed, then you could disable that pop-up warning for your users. All right. So after you fill out the start area, then you're going to move on to people. Okay, here you have to be a system administrator to at least create the user accounts. You're going to want to create accounts for people who need access to FutureFeed and create accounts for individuals who may not need access to FutureFeed, but you know they're going to have a lot of responsibility implementing the requirements. And you would you're essentially just logging them in FutureFeed so that way you can, I'm going to jump to a control here under a control. All throughout FutureFeed, we use the RACI model, RACI, okay, who's responsible, accountable, who needs to be consulted and informed. All throughout FutureFeed, we use the RACI model when it comes to responsibility assignment. So here we're under a control. So here we'd identify who's responsible for making sure that this control is getting implemented, or who's responsible for actually implementing it, who's accountable, who's making sure the people who are responsible for implementing it are doing what they're supposed to do, okay? So if you want to tag someone, team or individual, for the purpose of being able to clearly track responsibility assignment, you would want to create them an account in FutureFeed. But if they don't need access to FutureFeed, you'd essentially create them account but give them no access. So it's like you're just logging them in FutureFeed. So that way you can associate, you can clearly tag that person as responsible for something in a RACI matrix, but they don't have access to FutureFeed. So that's what that no access thing is about. So I would, however, consider if you are giving someone a lot of responsibility for these requirements, I would consider just creating them a standard account to FutureFeed, because then they can see that if they get assigned to something, they'll get an alert. Hey, you've been assigned this control, or hey, you've been assigned this POAM item. You can also then create tasks, and I'll show you that in a little bit, but you can create tasks, hey, it's time to run the weekly vulnerability scan. So, and you can assign that task to an individual. So if you end up assigning a person a lot of responsibility, think about the security requirements. And if you know they're going to have a lot of responsibility with getting those requirements implemented and maintaining them, then I would just create them a standard account access to FutureFeed, so that way you can use that alert capability where they get alerted that they've been assigned something, and they can see when something's past due or it's about to be past due or when it is due. And you can really use FutureFeed's compliance management capability. Whereas if they just have no access, if you tag them as being responsible for something in FutureFeed, you're going to have to communicate to that individual outside of FutureFeed. Hey, you've been assigned this POAM item, get the work done, right? Whereas if they have access to FutureFeed, they're going to get a notification that they've been assigned that responsibility. They would then log into FutureFeed, figure out what it is they need to do, close out the activity, and upload evidence. Let me know if I'm not being clear. All right, so here, manage users, you're adding users. Employees, no access. We have really two levels of access, standard access and admin access. You'd only give that admin role to one or two individuals. Everybody else would be standard or no access. Standard gives them access to all areas of FutureFeed. And at this point in time, that's pretty much all the roles we have. We are working on deploying out a more robust role-based access where you can really control, the different sections that someone may have access to. For example, if you had like internal to your company, you had a system POAM manager, and you wanted them to only be able to access the POAM area future feed. Okay, that's a future improvement, but we are working on that. Right now, it's just standard, no access and admin. And then when you're moving into an assessment, whether it's an internal assessment or an external assessment, you may want to consider giving that assessor access to your future feed environment. And that's that assessor role here. With this level of access, though, they're only going to have the ability to read your system security plan and see the status of your controls, read how the controls are implemented, see if a control has a POAM, and they're going to see your evidence. It's read-only access to your system security plan. They don't have the capability to edit anything or see people, tools, documents, or poems. They would only see this area, this SSP area of FutureFeed. So you would give any internal audit team assessors that level of access, or definitely if you're working with a C3PAO, some C3PAOs have agreed to get access to FutureFeed because they like to see the evidence and how it's all laid out. And so you'd give them that level of access. Okay, so after you add users, then you're going to want to start creating roles. There's some default roles here. These do get populated in your system security plan. All of them that are listed here, they will get populated in your system security plan. But you don't have to use them. You can mark them not applicable if you don't want to use them. For example, if you don't have an information owner role, just make it not applicable, and then you don't have to use that, okay? So, oops. So there's some default roles that you'll want to assign individuals to. It's as simple as clicking on the drop down and finding that person's name. If you don't see their name, then that means you didn't create them account. You have to go back to manage users and create that individual, either a no access account or a standard account. In roles, then select and assign roles, and then you create other roles. So there's additional roles here. You would just add a role, title it, get someone assigned to that role. In FutureFeed, when you do assign responsibility with the RACI model, try to always assign it to either a role or a team. Try to refrain from assigning responsibility to an individual person. And that's just a tip or recommendation, is because let's say that person leaves the company. Well, then you have to log back into FutureFeed, figure out everything that was assigned to that individual, and then get it reassigned to the new person. Whereas if you assign RACI responsibility to either a role or a team, it's as simple as going in here. Okay, Joe was the incident team lead. He just left the company. Robert's going to be picking up all that responsibility. So now he's the incident team lead. But all throughout FutureFeed, I assigned responsibility to this role. All of the responsibility is tied to this role. So now when Robert logs in, he's going to automatically see everything that old individual is working on, because he's going to see all the responsibility associated with this role that he's assumed. Okay, where you see that over is in the dashboard. I'm going to jump there. So in the dashboard, you have team responsibilities, where you can, anybody who does have access, to include no access, anybody you've created an account for in FutureFeed, you're going to see them listed here, and you can see everything that they've been assigned RACI responsibility for. You can see all the tasks that they have assigned to them, and you could see all the POAMs that they have assigned to them. So same thing with yourself. You could see what you have RACI assigned, task assigned, and POAM assigned. You're going to want to frequent this area. When you get new responsibilities assigned to you, they'll populate here. So if going back here, let's say Robert leaves the team, Larry takes that position, when Larry logs in his personal dashboard, he's going to see everything that Robert was working on because the responsibility stayed tied with the role or the team. The team is as simple as, you know, you have a compliance management team clicking on the person. Let's say these individuals left the company, and so now these folks are now part of the team, and you could set team leader. Anybody who's a member of that team is going to see all of the responsibilities that have been assigned to that team. So that's a recommendation, is when you assign responsibility, try to do it to a role or team. If you're a smaller company and you know you only have one or two people who are going to be really doing all the work, then you could, you know, assign it to an individual. But I still would consider making roles for those individuals and assigning them roles in FutureFeed. This default accountable role here, you'll want to set this. What this is in FutureFeed, as I showed you, there's a couple things that will trigger a poem entry to be automatically created. And that poem entry is going to be populated with a default due date. And if you set this, it's going to be automatically assigned to a default person or role. You're going to want to make sure you set this because then it prevents the issue of someone just triggered a poem from being created and it's not assigned to anyone, so really no one's working on it. You would want to make sure that whoever is in this default accountable role, they understand that they're going to be automatically assigned the initial person to a poem, and if they see that happen, then they need to go into that poem entry, figure out who really is responsible and get it reassigned. So it's preventing the issue of having poem entries that are not assigned to any person. I got a question in the chat. 1 second while I read it. Yes, I can do that. Yep. Let me wrap up on this people section here and then but I think I've covered everything about roles. Okay, set the default accountable role, add roles, try to assign responsibility to a role or a team. Manage teams, similar thing here, build out your teams. What are the different groups of people going to be working on the controls, the requirements, okay? And what this populate button is here, of course, when you add a new team, you could add team like that. After you add the team, it will show up here. Then you would click on it and start adding members to that team and set a team leader. What this populate button is we read through the 800-171 documentation and the CMMC Assessor's Guide documentation. And under these 35 controls here, it called out the system developer role. Okay. So if you want, instead of creating your own teams, maybe you don't have teams developed yet, you could use this bulk team creation, which is, it's like default, or it's like built-in teams that are already associated with some security controls. And it's a good possibility that anybody in your company who's operating as like a system developer capability is going to have some level of responsibility associated with these, what did it say, 35 security controls. Okay, so there's training teams. As you can imagine, a training team is probably associated with the training requirements. Okay, training requirements. We have remote work. You have some system administrators. People usually have those. That's tagged to these 79 controls, okay? So it's a quick way to build out teams. And then those teams are already assigned responsibility to whatever controls are here, okay? That's the populate button. Or you can build your own teams and get them assigned to the controls. I'm gonna jump back to the data inventory section. Or wait, actually, locations. I had a question about locations and how to, within a location entry, identify if that location has FCI or CUI. And you're right. The drop down that you saw where it categorized assets like CUI assets, security protection assets, that's not present in the location entries. It will be soon though. I did submit a ticket a couple weeks for that. I said we should put that here. So in the meantime, how you associate a location as having FCI or CUI is right here. So if this location has FCI, you're going to mark it as yes, it has FCI. If it does have CUI, you would identify CUI that it has. Yes, the drop down that I showed you was for tools where you're categorizing the different assets in here. Yep. Yep. And I'm hoping they put this over in the other area too. But for now, you do have a way to identify if a location is got FCI or CUI, as I just showed you. And then you do want to probably go into that location as well. And in the description area, put up a description of, define if there's FCI and CUI there and provide some rationale or some supporting narrative. All right. So we covered peoples. I'm gonna get through tools. And I must be talking slow because I'm running out of time. So in tools, you're gonna want to start logging all of your technology. Again, it's up to you if you want to just log the stuff that you know is going to be in scope or log everything and then use that categorization capability to define what's in scope and out of scope. But to start logging tools, it's as easy as hitting this plus button and you'll have to start typing it out. We don't have any import capability at this time, but just hit plus. I just created an entry, move on to the next one. Let's say I have a MFA tool. I have Duo MFA plus. So you're gonna start listing them out. After you list them all out, then you're going to want to open them all back up. Okay, so click on them and then start filling out this data. Who's responsible? You don't have to have someone, a person, a team, or a role tagged every RACI objective, but do try to at least get one of them filled out, at least the responsible, right? So who's responsible for managing MFA in my environment? My administrators. If MFA is being managed by an external service provider, then you're going to want to associate that tool with the CRM, the customer responsibility matrix. Okay. So you would click on it, new CRM, or add an old CRM. Now, if it's not you see how there's no drop down here, or I'm sorry, there's a listing of SRMs. If you don't see an SRM or CRM in here, well, yours is going to be blank. You're going to have to go over to documents and under reference documents, under CRM, create a listing for your CRM. When you create it here, then under tools is where you can find it in the dropdown. Okay. So if you have, and a CRM is going to come from that external service provider. So you'd get that documentation and log it into FutureFeed, and then you could associate that shared responsibility with either a tool, a location, or the security controls. Vendor, you can upload any documents you want with the technology, describe it, connect. So here we're starting to associate, think of it as like you're associating your evidence with the requirements. So MFA, you'd want to tag it to the MFA, the controls that require MFA. You could search by control number if you happen to know it. or you could search by keyword let's see if what comes up there. Yep, non-local maintenance needs MFA, okay. Here you're changing the depth of your search. You're searching at the control title level, the control requirement level, the objective level, and the additional guidance. So you would start tagging and associating your technology and your documents to the controls here. And don't worry about getting it wrong here, because eventually you'll do an internal assessment. And if you have some connections that don't make sense, you'll clean them up at that point in time, and I'll show you that later. So you connect controls, you'd fill out the compliance, categorize the asset. You can reference this infographic if you need some help with knowing understanding the different categories, tasks, evidence. I'll get to those in a second here. All right, so you'd start listing out your technology. Refer to the getting started pages if you need help, because it does tell you a little bit about, how to fill out the information. What can I show you here? All right, there's two areas in all of these fields. There's two areas. So you have active tools and services, and then if you scroll down, you have pending. When you create an entry down here, it's going to automatically put it on your POAM. So let's say your company doesn't have a vulnerability scanner, but you know you're going to need one to meet some requirements, okay? And you're going to plan on getting the Nessus vulnerability scanner tool. When I hit create now, it's going to create this Nessus vulnerability scanner now is on my system POAM. Okay, as shown up here, it's on my POAM. So same thing with, if you're in specific assets, here's where you may want to, let's say you have Windows 10 laptops, but you have the IT department has a different Windows 10 baseline configuration than the HR department. They have Windows 10, but their baseline configuration is a little bit different. So some people need to track specific assets or specific baselines, different images of assets. You could do that here. Under vendors, who's helping you do the work. Again, active vendors and then pending vendors. In here, you have an area for you to upload vulnerability scan results if you want. When you do that, it's going to create a POAM entry for all open vulnerabilities. You have a space to track your IT budget, cybersecurity budget. Okay, so in the tools area is where you're going to start listing all your technology, then open up that inventory item. I refer to these as inventory items. So open it up, fill out the data that's being captured. And definitely make sure you start connecting that technology to the controls. So that way, when you get into your internal assessment or gap assessment, basic assessment, you're going to see that associated evidence. Okay. So under documents, same thing. Start listing out all of the active documents. So anything that your company has currently implemented, enforced, is using, following, okay? Or down below, pending. So these are documents that you're working on developing and implementing due to the requirements. To add them, same thing, click on add, categorize it, name it. After you add it, then you're going to open up the item and fill out the data, okay? And definitely make sure you connect it. To use our templates that are available to all FutureFeed users, you'd click populate. So here you have access to 55 templates. As a FutureFeed user, there is a package add-on if you'd like. But these are all templates that you can use. So if you don't have like an access control policy, but you know you're going to need one, you can, preview the template by clicking on the title. It's already associated with these 19 controls. Whoever wrote this access control policy wrote it to meet these 19 security control requirements. Okay, if you want to use it, then you just hit copy and hit create. And now you're going to create an inventory item down here for that access control policy that has the template. Okay? Tasks. I'm running over here, but let me just show you tasks real quick. So to get things reviewed, approved, developed, let's go back into that access control policy. Actually, let's say that this access control policy, it needs to be reviewed. So I'm gonna assign let's say I'm gonna get it assigned by or reviewed by my CISO. I need him to review it and edit or approve. I'll show you all the things, okay? You create tasks. You're going to create tasks for the initial implementation of stuff, but then also think about creating tasks that reoccur for anything that needs to happen throughout the year. So if, for example, if I was in the risk assessment procedure area, I might want to make a recurring task that says, for an annually that kicks off annually for my annual risk assessment. Make things repeat, you just click on here and you can set your recurrence pattern, okay? So think about like annual risk assessments or monthly change management boards, weekly vulnerability scans, anything that needs to happen on a defined frequency, you're going to want to try to create a task in here with a reoccurrence, get it assigned to the right person so that way they get notification, hey, it's time to run my vulnerability scan. And then they can do that activity, log into FutureFeed, mark that task as complete, and upload evidence that they completed that item. But here, if I want to get it, it's as simple as, so I don't need this one to repeat, hit submit. Now, whoever I assign that to, they'll get notification of that task. They'll click on it. Then they'll click on the document and they can revise that document if they need to. But if it's good to go, they can hit save and complete and sign that they've approved it. Okay. CISO approved. Mark complete. Now what happens is we were just in the task area, but it kicked us over to the evidence area. And now I have my latest approved access control plan that was approved by my CISO. Here under my evidence folder, there's the signature, date, and timestamp. Okay. Any questions? I'm gonna stop.
No, there's just a lot to go over, a lot to review.
Yeah. So you'll get a recording of today's, let me stop sharing. Hold on. It's not letting me stop sharing. You'll get a recording of today's session and then feel free to sign up for more. If you're working on people, tools, and documents and you're a little stuck, you can always sign up for this same session again next week and then ask me some more questions. I'd be happy to help.
Great,
Okay.
thank you.
No, you cannot approve attached documents. When you attach a document, instead of using that live document editor, you would want to approve, it would have to be approved outside of FutureFeed and you'd upload the approved version. Charles. All right. Thank you all for your time. Whenever you're ready, sign up for the next session or re-sign up for this session. If you're stuck on stuff, I'm happy to help. All right. Thank you all. I'm going to end the meeting. Have a great day.